In the archives of the FBI, there is a document describing a former president of the United States watching the ritual murder of a child on a yacht in international waters. The FBI kept that document, filed it, archived it, and never investigated it. Today, we are going to explain what that document means, where these rituals come from, why children, why the powerful, and what the esoteric traditions that have documented these practices for millennia reveal about the darkest operating system of human power. Everything I present comes from federal law enforcement files, court proceedings, authenticated email archives, and congressional releases. Some of it is proven, some alleged, and some sits in a gray zone where institutions chose to file, preserve, and forget. January 30, 2026. The Department of Justice dumps over 3 million pages, 180,000 images, and 2,000 videos from the Epstein case. Largest single disclosure in American legal history. 43 victims' full names exposed, including minors. Unredacted images published on the government website. Attorneys for over 200 survivors called it the single most egregious violation of victim privacy in one day in United States history. The powerful stayed behind redactions. The victims got exposed. Buried in those pages between the flight logs and bank records sits a category of documents the media barely touched. Documents describing rituals, children, presidential figures, acts so extreme they sit in official federal reports, archived but never pursued. Most coverage asks who. This video asks why. Why would people who already have everything engage in ritualized extreme transgression? What function does it serve? What does the tradition of Moloch worship, millennia of initiatory rites, and centuries of documented elite ritual tell us about what this system actually is? Because once you understand the function, the Epstein case transforms. It stops looking like a criminal network and starts looking like a lodge. Everyone calls Epstein a predator. He was, but that misses the most important thing about him. Epstein was a keeper of a grimoire. September 2025. Bloomberg obtains 18,000 emails from Epstein's Yahoo account. 4 independent experts authenticate through cryptographic verification. Zero fabrication. What the emails reveal: a man who sent messages to himself documenting compromising situations involving the most powerful people on Earth, who catalogued photographs, videos, records with surgical precision, who logged who was present, when, where, under what circumstances, obsessively. He was building a weapon. In the Western esoteric tradition, a grimoire records power relationships. The Ars Goetia catalogues 72 demons alongside their seals, invocations, and binding conditions. The grimoire grants power through documentation. Who owes what? Who did what? Under what conditions the debt gets called in. Every photograph Epstein took functioned as a seal. Every flight log, an invocation record. Every email, a binding contract. The powerful served him because he held the evidence. That evidence could destroy them at any moment. The Bloomberg emails confirm this. A spreadsheet of 1.8 million in payments, watches to political aides, cars to lawyers, lingerie to teenage girls, all in the same ledger, all entries in the same grimoire. 650 emails with Ghislaine Maxwell, victim recruitment records, instructions for discrediting accusers. She claimed at trial she was a property manager. The emails show her functioning as primary handler. In ceremonial magic, the summoner who identifies, prepares, and delivers the offerings to the practitioner. Crisis management infrastructure. Before his first arrest, Epstein retained a former Reagan media director. Lists of acceptable vocabulary, draft apology letters, layers of contingency, professionals, decades of operation, But a grimoire only works if the transgressions it documents are extreme enough to bind permanently. A photograph at a party binds no one. A compromising financial record creates inconvenience. For permanent binding, you need something the participant can never explain, never justify, never escape. You need the ritual, and the ritual requires a specific kind of offering. This is the question everyone asks, and almost nobody answers with the depth it requires. Why children? Why across every century and every civilization do the most extreme power rituals consistently involve children? The surface answer is obvious. Children are the ultimate taboo. Harming a child represents the single, most universally condemned act across virtually every moral system on Earth. That makes it the most effective binding mechanism. Cross that line, and you can never return to normal society. You belong to whoever witnessed you cross it. But the esoteric traditions go much deeper, and understanding their reasoning explains why this specific practice has persisted for thousands of years, despite every effort to eradicate it. Start with Moloch. Moloch appears in the Hebrew Bible, in Leviticus and 2 Kings, as the deity to whom children were passed through fire. The traditional understanding, a bronze idol with outstretched arms, heated until glowing, into which children were placed as burnt offerings. The Tophet at Carthage, the sacrificial precinct dedicated to Baal Hammon and Tanit, the Phoenician equivalents, contains the archaeological remains of thousands of children. Urns, bones, organized, systematic, spanning centuries. The standard historical reading treats this as primitive superstition, ignorant people making offerings to imaginary gods. That reading is wrong, and the esoteric traditions explain why. In the Canaanite theological framework, Moloch was not a distant deity requesting tribute. Moloch represented the principle of power obtained through the sacrifice of what is most precious. The offering had to cost the giver something irreplaceable. An animal was insufficient. Grain was meaningless. The offering had to be the thing the human organism is biologically programmed to protect above all else, its young. This is the key. The sacrifice of a child is the most violent possible act against human nature itself. It requires overriding the deepest biological programming in the human body. The protective instinct toward children is not cultural. It is neurological, hormonal, hardwired across millions of years of evolution. To override that programming deliberately in a ritualized context produces a psychological and neurological event of extraordinary magnitude. The practitioner is not simply committing a crime. They are fundamentally rewiring their own operating system, destroying the part of themselves that responds to vulnerability with protection, replacing it with something else. The Frankist tradition articulated this precisely. Jacob Frank taught that divine sparks are trapped in the material world, imprisoned within moral law. To liberate those sparks, every law must be violated, and the most sacred law, the protection of children, must be violated most completely. Frank called this the descent into the abyss, the total inversion of natural order as a technology for accessing power that exists beyond moral constraint. Every left-hand path tradition has arrived at the same conclusion through different language. Crowley described it as crossing the abyss, the dissolution of the ego and its moral structures in Darth, the hidden Sapphira of the Kabbalistic tree. The Hindu Aghori sect practices rituals in cremation grounds, consuming from human skulls, deliberately violating every taboo of purity to achieve liberation through transgression. The Tibetan Buddhist Churd practice involves visualizing the offering of one's own body to demons, a ritualized destruction of attachment. All of these traditions share a single insight. The most extreme transgression against what the practitioner holds sacred produces the most extreme transformation of consciousness. And in the hierarchy of what humans hold sacred, children occupy the absolute summit. They represent innocence, future, continuation, hope. The biological imperative to protect offspring is the deepest program running in the human nervous system. Destroy that, and you destroy everything built on top of it. Morality, empathy, social contract, identity, all of it collapses. And from the rubble, something else emerges, something that operates without those constraints. The esoteric traditions call this liberation. The intelligence agencies, through MK Ultra, called it personality restructuring. The clinical literature calls it traumatic dissociation. Different vocabularies describing the same mechanism. Now apply this to Epstein's network. A former president, a prince, billionaires, people whose entire identity depends on being seen as legitimate, respectable, human. Make them participate in the violation of the single deepest taboo in human psychology. Document it, and they are yours, permanently, because they crossed a line that their own nervous system recognizes as absolute. Their body knows what they did, even if their conscious mind constructs a narrative to manage it. That is why children, that is what Moloch represents, and that is why this practice has survived every attempt to destroy it across 5,000 years of recorded history. The Bohemian Grove places a 40-foot owl at the center of its ritual. The owl has been linked to Moloch since antiquity, but the connection runs deeper than most analyses suggest. In Mesopotamian tradition, Lilith, the first wife of Adam in Kabbalistic lore, appears flanked by owls on the Burney relief, dated to approximately 1800 BC. Lilith represents the feminine principle that refuses subordination, the untamed force that exists outside divine order. The owl sees in darkness. It hunts while others sleep. It perceives what the daylight world cannot. In the Greek tradition, Athena's owl represents strategic intelligence, the capacity to see through deception and act with precision in conditions of zero visibility. When the most powerful men in America gather annually before a 40-foot owl and ritually burn their moral conscience in the cremation of care, the symbolism is precise. They are invoking the capacity to operate in darkness, to see what others cannot, to act without the constraint of care. And they are doing it through a ritual format that traces directly to the Tophet of Carthage, where the ruling class sacrificed children before Moloch to secure commercial and military dominance across the Mediterranean. The cremation of care is the sanitized modern version. Epstein's network, if the FBI filing is accurate, was the unsanitized one. And the progression from sanitized to unsanitized follows a logic the esoteric traditions articulate clearly. In initiatory systems, each degree of advancement requires a deeper transgression. The outer degrees are symbolic. The middle degrees are uncomfortable. The inner degrees are irreversible. Each step deeper binds the practitioner more completely to the hierarchy, and each step requires crossing a line that the previous step made possible. A person who attends the Bohemian Grove and watches an effigy burn has taken a first step. They have participated in a symbolic ritual with other powerful people. They have entered a shared space. They have begun to belong. But the inner circle requires more, and the most extreme inner circle requires the most extreme act. The act that makes all previous steps look innocent by comparison. The act from which there is no return. The Moloch exchange, innocence for power, humanity for operational freedom, the offering that costs everything. The tip was filed in 2020, describes events from around the year 2000, a yacht, international waters, zero jurisdiction, named Bill Clinton, Jeffrey Epstein, a possible reference to George Herbert Walker Bush, former president, former director of the Central Intelligence Agency. The allegations include the ritualized harming of a child using a specialized device. A separate passage describes acts against infants. I will reference the content once and use indirect language for the rest of the video. The document is publicly available. FBI procedure distinguishes dismissed from archived. Dismissed, worthless. Archived. There is something here, but we are choosing to stop. If the report was garbage, why keep it? If it had weight, why stop? The specific acts described follow a precise ritual typology. 3 elements that any student of comparative religion recognizes. These correspond to the 3 stages of the most extreme initiatory rites documented across human civilization. The child, innocence, the purest possible offering. Destruction of innocence inverts natural order completely. Creation reversed, the future consumed by the present. This is the Moloch principle made operational. Dismemberment, the oldest mythological motif in existence. Osiris torn apart by Set and scattered across Egypt. Dionysus torn apart by the Titans in the Orphic Mysteries. Purusha fragmented in the Rig Veda, his body becoming the material world. The Kabbalistic concept of Shevarat HaKalim, the shattering of the vessels, where the primordial light of creation breaks into fragments that fall into the material realm. Fragmentation of the whole into components that can be distributed, absorbed, incorporated into the participants, consumption, completion of the cycle, the boundary between self and other dissolves. The participant who consumes becomes the vessel. Every communion ceremony in every religion is a domesticated echo. Bread becoming flesh, wine becoming blood. The Aztec practice of consuming the heart of the sacrificial warrior to absorb his courage, the shared meal that seals the covenant. Whether these specific acts literally occurred stays unverified. Anonymous source, no physical evidence. But the symbolic architecture follows a ritual grammar documented for centuries. Whoever filed that report drew from authentic esoteric knowledge, and that alone tells you something about where this information came from. Consider what this means. An anonymous informant files a report through an official FBI tip line describing acts that correspond precisely to documented esoteric ritual typology. The child as offering, dismemberment as fragmentation of the divine, consumption as incorporation and covenant. The setting, a yacht, the perfect liminal space. The participants, political figures with intelligence connections. Either the informant witnessed real events and described them accurately, or the informant possessed deep knowledge of comparative religion and esoteric ritual practice and fabricated a report designed to match ancient typologies precisely. Both possibilities are significant. If the events occurred, the implications are obvious. If fabricated, the question becomes, who possesses both the esoteric knowledge to construct a typologically perfect ritual allegation and access to file it through official FBI channels and motivation to target specific political figures? That profile narrows the field considerably, and the FBI's decision to archive rather than dismiss suggests their analysts recognize the same thing. The filing sits in the gray zone, and the gray zone, as any esoteric practitioner knows, is where the most important truths reside. Between light and shadow, between proven and disproven, in the liminal space where certainty dissolves and discernment becomes the only tool that works. Pay close attention. Once you understand these three functions, the Epstein network locks into place. These functions have been articulated independently across multiple esoteric traditions for centuries. Intelligence agencies spent decades and billions of dollars rediscovering what occult practitioners had known all along. Function 1. Initiatory death. Every mystery school uses the same mechanism. Eleusis, Mithras, inner Freemasonry. The Egyptian rites described in the Book of the Dead. The candidate undergoes an experience so extreme, it permanently destroys their previous identity. The old self dies. What emerges belongs to the order. The Sabbatean Frankist tradition pushed this furthest. Sabbatai Zevi, 17th century, massive messianic following. Converts to Islam under threat, which generates a paradoxical doctrine among his core followers. The Messiah must descend into total darkness before redemption. Jacob Frank radicalizes this. Every commandment must be violated, every taboo shattered. The Frankists hold secret ceremonies, sexual rites, inversion of sacred law, systematic destruction of moral identity. Frank is imprisoned 13 years. The movement goes underground, threads through lodges, hermetic orders, surfaces in Crowley's synthesis of every transgressive tradition into a single operational framework. MKUltra arrived at the same conclusion through clinical research. Over 150 sub-projects, structured trauma fragments identity, and creates programmable subjects. Operation Midnight Climax. Brothels where targets were drugged and filmed for blackmail. The CIA spent billions discovering what the mystery schools had practiced for millennia. Extreme structured experience permanently alters who a person is. Apply this to Epstein, a president, a prince, billionaires. Their power depends on public perception. Make them participate in something that can never be confessed. Their old identity dies. What walks out serves the hierarchy forever. But this alone is just blackmail. The second function creates a system. Function 2, mutual binding. Every participant commits the same transgression. Every transgression is documented. No one can betray the group without destroying themselves. This is why Epstein documented obsessively. Every image, video, email was a binding thread. The awareness that evidence exists on a server, a drive, in a safe, was the chain itself. You did not need to be threatened. You knew. Hoover ran the FBI this way for 50 years. 8 presidents. None dared remove him. Epstein ran the same system with exponentially more material. Unlike Hoover, Epstein had video. But there is a third function, the one virtually no analyst discusses, because they lack the vocabulary. Function 3, the creation of an egregore. In a cult tradition, when a group performs a ritual involving extreme emotional intensity, they generate a collective psychic entity called an egregore. The egregore is not metaphor. In the tradition, it is understood as an autonomous force created by concentrated group consciousness, which then sustains itself by feeding on the emotional energy of its members. The concept appears across traditions. The Tibetan Buddhist tulpa, the Kabbalistic concept of the golem animated by collective intention. The Christian theological idea of the mystical body of Christ as a living entity composed of all believers. The Roman concept of the genius of the legion, the collective spirit that animated a military unit beyond the capacities of individual soldiers. The egregore binds the group in a way that transcends individual calculation. It creates loyalty that defies rational self-interest, a shared reality, a shared identity, a covenant that exists outside every social structure. Law does not reach it. Morality does not apply to it. It operates at a depth below conscious decision, and it sustains itself. This is critical. In the esoteric traditions, the egregore, once created, requires feeding. It needs periodic ritual to maintain its cohesion. This is why the ceremonies repeat, why Epstein's network operated continuously for decades, why the flight logs show the same names returning again and again. Each return strengthened the binding. Each new transgression fed the collective entity that held the group together. If a member stops participating, the egregore weakens for that individual. The bond loosens. The risk of betrayal increases. This is why Epstein maintained constant contact, why Maxwell managed relationships with such intensity, why the inner circle gathered repeatedly on the island, on the yacht, in the mansion. The egregore required maintenance, and the maintenance required repetition of the founding act. The Catholic Mass is structured on the same principle. The covenant must be renewed, the body consumed again, the blood shared again, the ritual repeated because the bond requires continuous reinforcement. The difference is the nature of the offering, and the nature of the offering determines the power of the egregore. This is why the ritual cannot happen in a normal space. It requires liminal territory, space that exists between categories, between nations, between laws, the yacht in international waters, the island surrounded by sea, the temple on the cliff. Every esoteric tradition places its most powerful rituals in spaces set apart from the profane world. The grove outside the city, the cave beneath the mountain, the crossroads at midnight, Epstein's Island, Little St. James, Caribbean, surrounded by ocean. On its southwest cliff, a structure everyone calls the temple. Blue and white stripes replicating the Ablak pattern found on sacred buildings in Jerusalem and Damascus. A golden dome. Zodiac constellations painted on the ceiling, a labyrinth terrace, and a lock on the outside of the door. A contractor examined the building and noted, if you wanted to keep people out, the lock would be inside. This lock was designed to keep people in. Sacred space, ritual, egregore, documentation, grimoire. That is the complete system. Every element serves a function. Every function has been documented across centuries of esoteric practice, and every piece of the Epstein network maps onto it precisely.
I was the first one to ever join the military in my family. When I got out, I knew that I wanted
maps onto it precisely. Here is the question beneath the question. Why does power gravitate toward the darkest possible acts? Why, across history, do we find the same pattern? The most powerful people engaging in the most extreme transgressions? Is this coincidence? Corruption? Moral failure? The esoteric traditions say something far more disturbing. They say the transgression is the mechanism. That power of a certain kind can only be generated through acts that violate the deepest structures of human morality, and that this has been understood, practiced, and refined for as long as civilization has existed. Think about what morality actually is, from a structural perspective. Morality is a set of constraints, rules that limit behavior. Do not kill, do not steal, do not harm children. These constraints enable society. They allow humans to cooperate, to build, to trust, but they also limit. A person bound by moral constraints cannot do certain things, cannot make certain decisions, cannot cross certain lines. For most people, these constraints are useful. They create the stability that allows ordinary life to function. But for those seeking power beyond ordinary limits, moral constraints become obstacles. The person who will not cross any line is constrained in what they can achieve. The person who will cross every line operates without limits. In game theory, the player with the fewest constraints has the largest possible action space. They can do things others cannot, threaten things others would never threaten, execute strategies that constrained players cannot even conceive. Every esoteric tradition that deals with power has articulated this principle. The left-hand path traditions explicitly. Crowley's Thelema, the true will must be discovered by dissolving every imposed moral structure. The Aghori, liberation comes through embracing what society rejects. The Frankists, every commandment violated, every constraint destroyed. But here is what makes this genuinely terrifying. It works, historically, documentably. The individuals and groups willing to cross the most extreme lines have, repeatedly, achieved and maintained power that constrained actors could not match. The Phoenician ruling class that practiced child sacrifice at the Tophet maintained commercial dominance across the Mediterranean for centuries. The Roman elites who participated in the mystery cults of the late Republic built the most powerful empire the Western world had seen. The intelligence agencies that ran MK Ultra and Operation Gladio shaped global politics for decades through methods that ordinary institutions would never employ. The moral person looks at this and sees evil. The esoteric practitioner looks at this and sees technology. A technology for accessing a mode of operation that is impossible for those who remain within moral constraints. The sacrifice of what is most precious, what is most innocent, what the human organism is most programmed to protect, is the most extreme possible act of constraint destruction. After that, nothing is off limits, nothing is sacred, nothing can be used as leverage because the participant has already crossed the ultimate line. This is why the ritual persists. This is what Moloch represents, the exchange of innocence for power. And the esoteric traditions have always understood that this exchange is real, that it produces measurable results, and that the cost is permanent. You do not come back from the other side of that line, and that permanence is, from the system's perspective, the entire point. There is a further dimension that needs to be stated directly because the esoteric traditions state it directly. The practitioner who has crossed the ultimate line possesses an advantage over everyone who has not. They can look across a negotiating table at someone who is morally constrained and know with absolute certainty that they are willing to go further, that they will do things the other person cannot even imagine doing, that no threat, no moral appeal, no social pressure can constrain them because they have already destroyed the part of themselves that would respond to those things. This is the predatory advantage the system produces, and it is self-reinforcing. The practitioner who operates without moral constraint accumulates more power. More power grants access to deeper levels of transgression. Deeper transgression destroys more constraints. The cycle accelerates. Every secret society document that describes degrees of initiation is describing this escalation. First degree, symbolic. Second degree, uncomfortable. Third degree, compromising. Inner degrees, irreversible. The structure is identical across Freemasonry, the OTO, the Frankist Underground, and every hierarchical initiatory system ever documented. The Epstein network operated the same escalation. First contact, a party, social interaction, nothing compromising. Next step, a massage. Young women, uncomfortable for some, but deniable. Next step, minors, documented, binding. And if the FBI filing is accurate, inner circle. Ritual acts from which there is no return. Graduated initiation into total binding. The oldest technology of power on Earth. One final element deserves attention: water. In virtually every esoteric and mythological tradition, water functions as a barrier between worlds. The river Styx, separating the living from the dead. the primordial waters of Nun in Egyptian cosmology, from which all creation emerged. The mikveh in Jewish tradition, the ritual bath that marks the boundary between impure and pure states. Baptism in Christianity, passage through water as death and rebirth. The Celtic otherworld, reached by crossing water to enchanted islands. Avalon, Tir na Nog, always across water, always on an island. Water dissolves identity. Water separates the sacred from the profane. Crossing water marks the transition from one state of being to another. Little St. James is an island, reached by crossing ocean. The yacht floats on international waters. Both spaces are surrounded by the element that in every tradition represents the dissolution of the old self and the emergence of the new. The participant who crosses water to reach the island has, symbolically, already begun the initiatory journey. They have left the mainland, left jurisdiction, left the normal world behind. When they cross water again to return, they are different. What crossed back is bound to what happened on the other side. This is why islands, this is why yachts, this is why water. The geography is the first layer of the ritual, and every esoteric tradition on Earth confirms this reading.